And thank you for the invitation to be here at this great event. And good morning, everybody. Yes, let me see where, yeah. Yeah. I'm going to be talking from a cultural point of view, both as a researcher who has followed dementia projects in Denmark for the past 30 years, as a grandchild and young adult who had two parents who had dementia undiagnosed then, a father who died 14 years ago who had Alzheimer and vascular dementia, and who I was the co-carer together with my mother, and now the photo model of my slides, my mother, for whom I am the prime caregiver, together with the staff at her nursing home. And so this is from where I talk. And I'm going to talk about language, about the words that we choose, and not only the words that we choose in between us here, people who have experience from a variety of in a variety of ways about and with dementia, but also those words that we use to communicate to those who probably know very, very little about dementia. So this is the scope. So we don't invent our language all the time. We have it and we change it a bit, but we also tap into the given language, and that's why it's so important what words are used. Historically, there's been a separation between old age and disease, so that today we don't talk in this setting about senile dementia, which we used to not very many years ago, and which still is the language used in some countries. And we also speak of dementia and care in two very distinct categories: the persons with dementia and the caregivers. And of course, our lived experience is very different, but it does maybe not mean that we always have to be separated. Sometimes we belong very, very closely together. You could say that there are these kind of paradigms of dementia, where one is the standard, where from a dementia disease is diagnosed and defined, which stems from neurology. And I will also be building quite a lot of Tom Kitwood, who has been inspiring to caregiving in a large part of the world. And he named this a standard paradigm, but you could also say maybe that there has evolved a standard care paradigm, which is the person-centered care, which puts forward the person instead of focusing mainly on the disease. And it's maybe strange to think, but language is not just talk. It certainly also defines our experience, how we experience. And hence it's such a powerful tool, the language that the Alzheimer's Association in each country, but also, of course, the European and the World Organization come up with when we talk about dementia. The demands that is put in, like we just heard about, into action plans and national policies. Also in everyday life, for instance, in support groups for caregivers, there was a study way back 30 years ago. An American sociologist was looking at some of the first support groups in the US, and he demonstrated how people's experience would be expressed very differently before and after they had been in such a support group, because there people were taught to look at the care experience in a very specific way, and also to learn about the stages of dementia. And that means it sets up a frame to look at your own experience through, and that is actually forming your experience also. And this means maybe that we get very standardized ways of talking about caregiving experience differently from what we actually experience, which are so many different experiences. If we focus also in the communication about dementia, maybe we could talk about an Alzheimerization, where even though there are many dementia diseases and many people suffer from different diseases, when we talk about dementia, it tends to be Alzheimer's disease that we talk about, even though also many people have vascular diseases and other dementia diseases. So it can become difficult to identify, or more difficult to identify with the standard descriptions that we learn of. Then there is another thing in the focus that, not in this setting of course, but I'm also talking about how dementia is communicated out of the Alzheimer's reference, and where severe dementia and strange behavior comes to the foreground when somebody is describing what dementia is like. We hear the most fearful and frightening stories. And then lately there has also, I don't know in your countries, but in Denmark there's a very strong focus also on younger adults. And being a gerontologist by heart who is very interested in old people, I just have this wish that it doesn't shade or cover up the situations for older people. I'm going to show you two images, two examples from 2016. This is from a magazine, a health magazine. I'm sure our countries have these health magazines that are you can pick up in the pharmacy, or you can pick them up, and you can get them for free. And then earlier this year, this Helse is the name of our magazine here. They had an issue on dementia to inform about dementia, because it's so important that all those who don't know about these diseases get more knowledge. And this was the headline of the first article, and it says in English. Then the title of that article was "The Dark Disease," and it says, the first little paragraph goes like this: "To be a caregiver to a person who mentally disappears while alive is an extreme burden to caregivers." So this is not, I think, a representation of dementia. It's a representation of a very fearful and particular way of describing dementia. And the problem arises when this is actually public information on dementia, 2016. Another example is from a small pamphlet I picked up, which in a municipality where the intention is to recruit demensvenner, dementia friends, and it says Dementia Friends Network for Demented Caregivers and Volunteers, and the aim is to create communities and joy and so on. But the painting, even though it's more colorful, it reminds me of Edvard Munch's The Scream, or this distorted image that is chosen, of course, to gain attention. But again, it's a very, in many ways, frightening image that none of us would want to identify with. So just to put what is at core here, it is the stigmatization that we risk running when the images, the fearful images, are so strong. And stigma origins from Greek, where it was a physical sign put on people which affected their social status. So it was not just their feeling on themselves, but more a reduced look on that person, where you become, when you're stigmatized, going from being a whole person who you are to a more discounted one. And what also goes with stigma, where it links onto being a caregiver, that it also produces stigma on those who are closely related because you become part of the same stories. So a dementia diagnosis, I think there could be very good reasons why people would be reluctant to get that diagnosis. It's a medical aim, and it's also the Alzheimer's Association's aim to get people diagnosed very early. But when you look at it from the other side, it's very understandable that you can be reluctant to get this diagnosis, because it's not just a label. It changes the social structure of people's lives. It changes other people's interpretations. They can start thinking, oh, she probably says or does that because she has dementia, not because she is who she is. And it also hence changes people's expectations to what you can, and certainly also to what you cannot. So these public images that I just gave you a few examples from the Danish context, and I don't know what whether the language in your different countries have this word, but in Danish, I can assure you that the word demente, the demented, translated directly, is the far most used word to describe persons with dementia and their situation. And what is the demented? It is a scary story. It's not a person. It's a story. And it's a standard story that we keep repeating. And I was now preparing for this, I was actually shocked to see how many places also in written text that den demente is the key word. I hear it all the time. Anytime you would say to somebody that, for instance, that your mother has a dementia disease, they will immediately start talking about the demented, as if everybody knows what the demented means. It's and this is where worst case scenario becomes the standard story that other people can click into. And it actually is a story that leaves us with no sense of opportunities. It's a fixed, very narrow story. And I think that it also fills people with shame. Shame to be that burden for caregivers, fear of becoming a burden later down the road that we get described. And fear is a very powerful tool also to get, it's almost a very productive tool, you could say, because if you want, for instance, to have an increased focus on dementia, how can you do that if you don't also come up with these frightening stories? So there's no real solution but to be very, very careful about the language that we use all the time. Because also this is creating some kind of unbalance between persons with dementia and caregivers. We don't need that fear in between us. There is enough stuff to handle already. But I see that this comes out of these images. So it is kind of separating caregivers from persons with dementia, even though we most of the time go hand in hand and very closely together, because we apply the problem not only to the disease, but because they're the ones carrying the disease also to persons. There is this very important psychosocial dimension of our lives, which means that we all need the response from each other, and we need involvement of people around us. And maybe the word dementia-friendly is part of this. It's a claim to have very good services and opportunities for people with dementia. But I was thinking yesterday when our Danish Minister of Health and the Elderly, which we have, She told a short story of an old woman in a supermarket who she couldn't handle when she was buying her groceries because everything went too fast and people weren't paying enough attention and being careful. And she told the manager, and they ended up opening a slow line, which she said many people like to go there. And this could be a reminder that we would like friendly societies that people with dementia can also live in. But if they had put up a sign with a dementia-friendly line, maybe not everybody who would need that specific service would go there. And then those people who have dementia and their caregivers would once again be picked out as particular persons, where everything we want to do is be part of society, like we just heard, but with the professionalization that it takes from society. So we want to find solutions together. Tom Kitwood had this, what he called an equation, where dementia is not only disease in the brain, it's your personality. It's our life story. It's our physical health. The last study I did, I was in a nursing home for people with dementia. They were really dementia friendly. And then one morning, this lady was screaming and crying and had a horrible time. And it took hours before they realized that she had a urinary infection, which can have devastating consequences, particularly in old age. So is that dementia friendly? Or is it lack of professionalism? So we should be very careful to apply these words. Of course, there's also the neurological impairment, which is at stage here, and also the psychosocial, psychological environment. And I think Kitwood has a very, very good point in making dementia, framing it more broadly. And this makes us, this puts the person to the front, because only a person can be all this. Whereas we say dementia friendly, we may consider what we are friendly to. Can we be friendly to a disease that is so broad and that is situated in each of our lives? So I'm probably advocating that we have to find our ways, that maybe these standard stories do not fit, and we shouldn't have our stories shaped by these standard stories. We should create meaning where we are, and try to make sense of the incomprehensible, and sometimes just leave it alone because it's not understandable. And we together can bear what is unbearable, but it's not only dementia diseases. There are many other diseases that we would rather live without, and there are dreadful things happening in people's lives, there are good things happening. So to get the whole story, like you also said, that people have other identities than the dementia disease. So we can express our identities and very different roles. Every other person I meet would also come up and say, so you've become the mother of your mother? That's a standard phrase to term when you're a daughter to a mother with dementia. I never heard it with my father, you become the mother of your father. So it just shows how we have these standard ways of communicating. But no, I'm not the mother of my mother, but I'm a very good carer, I think. And I want to end this to say that I just hope that dementia friendly doesn't become just another buzzword, that anything could go, so to speak, under the radar, just because there's also a big market out here. For instance, we see nature films created for people with dementia where you can apply for money to create these particular movies. But is it necessary always to make particular products directed? And do we sometimes run the risk of increasing the stigmatization along with the improvements that we are trying to make? Yes, thank you.